This is the main part of my title, but it has a subtitle, and that is, I learned to stop worrying and love the internet. Those of you who've seen the movie Dr. Strangelove will, I hope, catch the reference. Well, let's start with the basics. This is what college enrollment has done over the last 40 years or so, 45 years actually, since 1970. All I can say is that if the stock market looked like this, everyone would be very unhappy with the economy. But this kind of growth, I think, means different things to different people. And in particular, one of the things, there are two, I'd say, developments that have happened in America over the last 20 years especially, that have caused this growth to exert certain pressures on higher education. Those two trends are, in some sense, the stagnation of income for the middle class and the growth of the internet, which has been truly revolutionary in terms of our information. So we've gone from a little bit less than 9 million total students to some 20 million total students. And you can see that the vast majority of that growth has really been in public institutions, public 4-year, public 2-year. And in fact, the breakdown between those two can be shown here. You can see that both of them have grown significantly during that time. What we're going to be examining is not just how this differentiates among the different institutions, but also how it differentiates in various ways in terms of the type of students that we see and what that may mean for the future. Now, this is the big problem that the United States has right now. All that growth, we've grown by a factor of 2.4 over the last 40 years, and yet, this is the United States right here, this blue bar here, in terms of the tertiary educational attainment. That's what percentage of your people between 25 and 34 have achieved an educational credential from a higher ed institution. And we're nowhere close to the top, which is Korea. Let me give you a little better rundown of this. Korea has 65%, almost 2/3 of Korean citizens between 25 and 34 have a higher ed credential. And the United States is only 42%. Right? This was a 2010 study done by the OECD. And some of you may recall that the president then established a goal for the United States to reach the top of the rankings by 2020. That's a pretty short order in order to grow by 23% the percentage of your population that achieves an educational credential. And it really calls for, I think, some fairly drastic measures that we might need to take in order to do that. So let's see whether that's going to be possible. I'm going to look into my crystal ball. And some of the things that we may be considering are the following questions. First, who will attend college in the future? Will we continue to grow beyond 21 million, or will it level off? Will it be affordable for everyone, or will it only be a place for the privileged few? What will be taught? What kind of subjects will we be offering in college, and who will be offering that? So the next one is, how will that education be delivered, and by who? What will the faculty look like? Really important one, who will pay for higher education? And finally, where will students enroll? Will they enroll at home in front of a computer? Will they enroll at a college somewhere? Will they enroll in their local area, or will they prefer now to go some distance to enroll? So let me break this down into 5 trends. I'm going to try to do this without giving you too much static over the mic. First trend is about our student body and the quality of that student body. And it goes something like this. Our students are older, more diverse, and less well prepared for college. Now, I want to enter the caveat that they're not all older, and they're not all more diverse, but certainly the trends point toward a very different student body today than the one that we had about 20 or 40 years ago. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the last part, the less well prepared for higher education. I want you to imagine that this is a distribution of academic ability of high school graduates. All right, so there is a large central part. This is the average student who graduates from high school. These are the really bright students that graduate from high school, and these are the less bright students who graduate from high school. Now, this is going to be a very conceptual graph. There's nothing quantitative about it, except for about 50 years ago, one could imagine that the portion of students that went on from high school to college was a distribution something up here. So these were the really bright students in this edge. This is about right, about 25 to 30% of the students went on to higher ed. And one could imagine then that this group that was in the middle more or less defined what it was to be college level academics. All right, well, what does it look like now? First of all, let me ask you to imagine. Let's imagine that high school hasn't changed much, at least in terms of influencing that curve to move one direction or the other. The academic abilities today are more or less the same as they were 50 years ago. If we're going to add students going to college, where are those students going to come from? Well, they're going to come from the rest of this distribution. So now if we have, as we do today, 65 to 70% of our students going to college, that distribution looks something like this. And I also want to point out that the group down here in this part of the distribution are the group that now are at a lower academic aptitude than what we defined as college level academic aptitude here. So this explains, I think, a little bit why we see so many students, as many as 30%, that require developmental math or developmental reading and writing. It's not necessarily that the high schools are worse or that the students are worse. It's that we're trying to bring more of them into higher education. And so, and perforce, we have stuck ourselves on a definition of what college level is based on the group that we had about 50 years ago. So this is going to be a continuing trend as we add more and more students going to higher ed. We should expect to see more challenges with students being able to do the level of work that we once thought of as being college level work. Now what about the age of students? Okay, the color's a little bit bleached out, but the red and pink colors here are traditional age students, and the blue colors and light blue are above traditional age students. Now, we can see the trend that I showed you on the first slide, the steadily increasing population from 1970 to 2010. But what you can really see is that our traditional age students, which once were somewhere around 75% of all students, are now only about 58% of all students. The lighter colors here, by the way, the pink and the light blue, represent part-time students. So you can see that the percentage of students that are attending that are part-time students has really declined from a fairly narrow range here to a much broader range. More than a third of our students are part-time. To put some numbers on these, those that are above 24 years of age, that is non-traditional age students, have grown from 28% of all students to 42% of all students. And those that are part-time have grown from 32% to 38%. Now you might say, well, more students are going to graduate school now, that's why they're older. But in fact, graduate students represent 14% of the population, both in 1970 and in 2010. So this is really a descriptor of our undergraduate student body. Our students are older. It represents more students that are coming back after maybe taking some time out of school. And so we've got to find ways to bring them back into the educational mix and meet their needs for a college level education. Let's talk a little bit about diversity. This is, I guess the first thing I want to say about diversity is, I think a really remarkable thing about the United States is that if you look at the diversity of students in higher ed, it is pretty representative of the diversity of people in the United States. That is to say, there's no one group that is disproportionately represented, not even Asians, in higher ed. But what is different about the different ethnic groups and represented here is the way in which they enroll in higher ed. And in particular, what I want to point out are a couple of things. All students, which are shown over here at the far right, you can see that the vast majority, the blue and the yellow, which are all four-year schools, they represent about 60% of the total are in four-year schools. About a third are in community colleges, and a little less than 10% are in private for-profit schools. If you look at the particular groups here, the white, Asian, and multiracial students, they pretty much look like this. But if you look at some of the other groups, our African American, Hispanic, and Native American students, they have a very different profile in terms of where they enroll in college. All right? They tend to enroll more predominantly in community colleges, the red. A much lower percentage is enrolled in four-year schools. And I think it's a little difficult to see with the lighting, but the purple bars here, especially for Native American and African American students, enrolled in for-profit schools is very high, higher than any of the other groups. And this may or may not have an impact on their ability to finish. I'll just say that the students that are going to the for-profit schools right now are having more difficulty finishing, and they're emerging with more student debt. And so these may be some troubling considerations when we think about expanding our reach for higher ed to more of these groups. Our graduation rates, if you read the news, you'd think, well, nobody's graduating from college, and we're all concerned about student success. But in fact, when you look at the numbers, and this is over a 10-year cohort. By the way, the reason I'm showing you 2006 cohort and not 2014 is the 2014 cohort hasn't graduated yet. And this is a measure of how many students who entered college in these years graduated within either 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years. All right, so you can see in 1996, these were the graduation rates for each of those time periods. And in each case, they increased by 4 to 6% in the intervening 10 years. And graduated by 2012, for example. So things are getting better. But there's a caveat on this as well. Students of color, so this is the entire cohort up here, students of color are typically graduating 10 to 20% less within those time frames. So this represents a challenge for us. How are we going to adapt in the future to make sure that everybody is enjoying those same kinds of success rates after 4, 5, and 6 years and don't have to take longer to finish higher ed and therefore, incur more debt? In particular, this is what I'm focusing on, 10 to 20% less than the average. So there are some studies that have been done that have studied students as they went through school and looked at what are some of the major reasons why students might not be finishing in time. And in particular, they identified several very key indicators that seem to be correlated with students that finish college, that is, finish a degree within, actually, in their case, an 8-year period. Now, these were behaviors that were associated with 95% degree completion rate within 8 years. This is pretty phenomenal. Any students within any ethnic group but one that displayed this sort of behavior, enrollment behavior in college, finished college within 8 years. The one group that did not was Hispanic students. And they tended to finish college at about 80% rate, even when they displayed all of these enrollment behaviors. Now, why is this important for us? Well, let's take a look at national demographics. This is where we are right now, 2015. About 62% are white non-Hispanic, about 12% are African American, about 18% are Hispanic. But what's going to happen over the next 40 years? That 18% Hispanic is going to grow to 28%, and the white non-Hispanic is going to decline. So in other words, the issues that we're seeing with Hispanic students completing college are going to only become greater as we move into the future. We've got to not just do things better, we've got to do things probably differently than we have. Now, some states are early indicators. They're like the parakeet in the mine shaft. Texas is one of those. Our population is already 38% Hispanic. That may even be higher now because the slide is about a year old. And so these are the states where you can see what the future is going to look like. And in fact, in many cases, we think of ourselves here in San Antonio as being on the front edge of this demographic change. Our demographics today are going to be what Texas looks like in 2040, and Texas today is what the United States is going to look like in 2040. So these are the students of the past. These are the students of the present. What will the students of the future look like? Well, we'll see a greater diversity of them. We'll see more age range difference. We'll see students that are returning to get an education after having been in the workforce for a little while. We'll see people like veterans that are coming back to get an educational degree, a higher ed degree. So we have a very different set of students from the ones that we saw in the past. Let's move along to trend 2. This is about what kinds of classes, what kinds of courses of study students are making. And indeed, this trend has been going on for more than 150 years. More students are going into professional disciplines. I hope you can relate to this one. This is our construction management group that graduated from UTSA a couple of years ago. And so hopefully you're employing some of them because they need jobs. But the fact that students are looking more at professional opportunities means that they are going to school maybe for different reasons than students did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, college may have been a finishing school for the rich and elite. Now, it's a necessary prerequisite for they're getting a job. Students really reflect that in where they enroll and what they major in. So let's take a look at the liberal arts disciplines, broken down roughly as humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. Now you can see in every one of these cases, these have gotten larger over time. We've seen growth in student enrollment. And in fact, relative to 1970, humanities have actually seen the fastest growth. They've doubled in that 40 years, the number of students they produce. I can say, well, gosh, I thought that liberal arts were, shriveling up. Everybody's concerned about why aren't there more English majors now. Actually, English is not increasing, it's staying about level. But the fact of the matter is these are all growing. Well, this isn't necessarily the relevant comparison that you want to make of 2010 versus 1970. What you want to look at is, how does it compare to the growth in the U.S. population? Or how does it compare to the growth in college enrollment? And you can see that relative to this growth, especially that growth relative to college enrollment, is not spectacular. In fact, they're losing ground relative to some of the others. So what do the professional fields look like? Somewhat different. And in fact, you can see that their growth rates are anywhere from, well, I'm going to ignore education for a moment, they're from anywhere from 3 to 6 during that same time period. Education has declined in part because we're now demanding more of our teachers not get education degrees, we get degrees in their subjects. And so that's why you see a general decline from 1970 to 2010. All right, so more students are majoring in these professions. What is that going to mean for the liberal arts? Well, I think it's going to have several impacts. It's going to change the way we think about the curriculum. The curriculum that we use in higher ed has been set in place for a long, long time, for more than 100 years, which consists of a general education core, it consists of major courses, it consists of elective courses, and it consists of co-curricular activities. So those things, some of that may stay the same, other parts of it may change, especially as we see the need to develop certain skill sets for students. We need to think about what our learning goals are for those students. Is learning a Shakespeare sonnet what they need, or do they need something else? If they are learning a Shakespeare sonnet, is there a way that learning that Shakespeare sonnet can help them learn critical skills that they can put to work when they leave college? We need to be thinking about more modern pedagogical methods, and I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the fifth trend. I believe that we need to be talking, as I mentioned, about, if we're going to read a Shakespeare sonnet, it's not just the beauty of the sonnet, but it's the critical thinking that goes into analyzing what it means. And maybe some of those critical thinking skills are useful in analyzing a memo or analyzing a report and understanding what that means, although the report won't be nearly as nice to read as the sonnet. I think a real question is going to be, is all of this a threat to small liberal arts institutions? I think we are all aware that this past month or so, Sweetbriar was voted to close in stores. Now, I realize that some of that is in flux and there are a number of groups that are rising to this defense, but Sweetbriar is not alone in being into some financial straits as a small private liberal arts school. And so I think a real question is going to be, will they survive? I think the bottom line, though, is changing the curriculum anywhere, certainly at college, is very difficult. It's like moving the dead. I also would like to point out that at the master's level, we're seeing very similar trends. So again, the liberal arts increasing by a factor of about 1.5 to 2. Professional disciplines, you can see, are really increasing a lot. And you can also see the difference in education. Education has doubled since 1970 because now the main credential that it is awarding is to existing teachers and others, and principals and superintendents and so forth that are advanced degrees. All right, let's move along to trend number 3. This has to do with our faculty and the fact that doctoral students are having a much more difficult time now finding a position teaching in college. Some of them are ending up like this poor young gentleman serving coffee at Starbucks. Of course, respect for the faculty has never been high. Let's look a little bit at what's happened with doctoral degrees awarded. So since 1992, now this, I want to take pains to point out that this is half the time frame that I've been talking about. I've been going back to 1970, now I'm just going to go back to 1992. So the growth in doctorates in all fields has gone from about 1.5 to 2. This is actually faster than the growth in baccalaureate degrees. Now, how does this compare to other things? So, the U.S. population growth and so forth is going to be less than it was in the previous one. So for other groups, U.S. population has only grown by 1.2, and FTE student enrollment has only grown by 1.5. So this suggests that we're producing an awful lot of doctorates relative to the number of students that we have in college. When we look at faculty, the number of faculty positions, at least among the tenured and tenure-track faculty, has only increased by 1.4, while the part-time faculty has tripled. The result of these trends is that we have much more of a part-time faculty than we have ever had before, and it's now at about 50% of all of our faculty are part-time faculty. So what does this look like graphically? Now what I'm showing you here are public universities on the left-hand side and private nonprofit, so those are like the liberal arts schools and so forth on the right-hand side. And what's alarming in this is that our permanent full-time faculty are declining steadily to where they're now only about 2/3 of our faculty in public schools and a little less than half of our faculty at private schools. So there is a huge dependence on these part-time faculty across the board, even more pronounced in private schools than in public schools. Now, the reason this is important is that we know that one thing that correlates with student success and degree completion is having full-time faculty that are available outside of class, faculty that are invested in the curriculum, faculty that are going to be available for students. So when we have so many part-time faculty, one of our concerns is that this will affect student degree completion, and we may not be able to achieve President Obama's goal for 2020. Now, there are also age considerations relative to faculty, and some of these, I believe, may drive this increase in part-time faculty. Let me explain what I mean. 1994, the retirement age for faculty was abolished. At that point, most colleges had a retirement age of about 70 years of age. And you may recall that this was, during the 1980s, we abolished retirement age all over the place. Somehow, universities were able to sustain that for faculty for another 7 to 10 years. But in 1994, there's no longer retirement age for faculty. Well, what happened? Well, the average age of faculty increased by 2 years within the next 12 years. All right, but what did this look like in terms of a distribution? So this is what the faculty age distribution looked like just before the retirement age was abolished. And you can see that there's a few hardy souls that are up here at 70, but by and large, most faculty have retired by then. All right, within 6 years, this was the distribution. Now, what you can see is that the peak of this distribution has already shifted from here to here. If we go another 5 years, you can see that the peak has shifted even farther. And to help aid your eyes in seeing that, just sort of connect the dots here. So within a very short period of time, within a decade of abolishing retirement age, we've seen this radical shift and much more population of faculty, especially from about 60 onward. Now, why should that matter? Why should that mean we have more part-time faculty? Well, think about it. When you have a starting faculty member, I mean, they make a good salary, but they're at the bottom of the salary pool. As they go through their careers, they get raises, and they're more and more at the upper ends of the salary distribution. So now if I took these distributions and applied, I'll just say, a very similar sort of salary scale that increases linearly as you get older, which is roughly what happens in real life. That means that all these faculty that are up here in this high age end of the distribution are now going to be taking up more and more of the salary at the university. So in particular, we can see that the amount of the salary payroll that's for faculty under 40 stays about the same. It drastically declines for middle-aged faculty, and it drastically increases for faculty above 60. Since we're paying more for these faculty that have hung on beyond what used to be the retirement age, we have less money for hiring others and sustaining them in faculty careers, and I think it drives more of the reliance on part-time faculty. It's only one factor though. There are other factors that are leading to that as well, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So, evolving faculty issues. This is what I look like when I used to teach. So the question is, will our PhD programs prepare students adequately for professional careers? Do we need to be incorporating more professional development, more professional training into our PhD programs? Instead of just training new scholars, we probably need to be preparing them for other things as well. I think we have to ask the question, will tenure be modified, eliminated? What will happen there? I've heard proposals, some of which say that maybe tenure should be something that's granted for a fixed period of time, after which faculty may be retained, but it will be dependent upon their performance in the classroom and elsewhere at the university. You can imagine this is going to be a very hot topic among faculty. Will faculties become more differentiated and specialized? In other words, will we maintain a core of faculty that are tenure track, that are predominantly responsible for the research mission of our universities, with another large group of faculty that are not tenure track, that are doing most of the instruction? Well, I hate to say it, but we're already moving in that direction. And so this is not such a difficult trend to see happening in the future. I think an intriguing one is, will our courses be taught by individuals or by teams? I could easily imagine cases where departments work as a team to develop those courses, and maybe they get people who are especially good at delivering material to do the delivery, others who are especially good at compiling the material to do that. So it's kind of like putting on a news broadcast. You know, they have the pretty face up on camera delivering the news, but you can bet they didn't write the news. Will faculty members be affiliated, or will they just be free agents? In other words, are we moving to something where everybody is going to school online and you have faculty sitting at home and they just make their services available to the highest bidder, or maybe they're just giving freelance courses that colleges will somehow certify as being adequate to meet the needs for a particular degree program? I mean, these are all questions that I think may be faced in the future. So, this one's the critical trend here. Students and their families are increasingly unable to afford college. And this is, again, part of this stagnation of middle class income. This is a really long quote. I'll just say that Richard Feynman was a personal hero as a physicist, and I loved his use of astronomical numbers and economical numbers as means of describing the national debt. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to memorize this chart right now for the next 2 minutes, and we'll have a quiz in just a few seconds. No, I'm going to summarize this for you as follows. Over the last 25 years, these are some things that we've seen happening. This is strictly for public universities. This is in constant 2013 dollars, so it's inflation adjusted. And this is the funding per student that has been appropriated by states on average. I want you to digest that for just a moment. It has gone down about $2,400, which is about 30%. Now, what has happened in order to make that up? The tuition per student has gone up by just about the same amount. It's a little bit more. We're getting a little bit more than we used to get, by about $400. But you can see that that represents a doubling of tuition in that same 25 years. Anyone that doesn't think there's a cause and effect here, I would invite you to help explain it to me how this doesn't matter. But when you sum those totals up, they're pretty much the same number. So the amount of money that we have to spend per student is about the same now as it was 25 years ago. And I think many of you are feeling that pinch when you think about having to do more, because the facilities are more complicated now than they were before. But we've got the same income that we had per student 25 years ago. Now, what does that mean in terms of the actual budgets that are coming from? The share of state budgets has gone down on average over that time by 2%. You might say, oh, 2%, that's a really small number, but state budgets are really big and college budgets are somewhat smaller. So, as you can see easily, the total share of institutional budgets that come from tuition has more than doubled in that time. And so, in cases where institutions used to be state-supported, they're becoming more and more state located, I think is the term we use, because they're not being supported nearly as much. And there are even some institutions, Oregon, Virginia, where in Colorado, where the portion of the budget for those institutions that comes from the state is less than 10%. So these are not state-supported schools. Now, what does this mean for students? All right, what I'm going to do is compare from 20 years ago to now. What is the percentage of the median household income that it would cost to go to different kinds of schools? We'll start with public 2-year, so they're the least expensive. And you can see to go to a year of a public 2-year school back in 1994 took about 14% of a median household income. It's gone up to about 18%. Not a terrific change, but I dare say the people who are paying for that are feeling it. At public 4-year schools, it's gone up from 19 to 25%. So that means that for the median household, if you've got a kid in college at a public 4-year school, about a quarter of your household income for that year is being paid to college, and another quarter is being paid to Washington, D.C. It's a nice symmetry. If you're sending your kid to a private nonprofit school, look at this, it's almost half now. And of course, it used to be 37%, so I guess it hasn't increased that much, but it's a lot. Half your income going to pay for college. I want to put this, in a little bit more context. Federal aid, it used to be that 29% of students had a grant and 31% had a loan. Those numbers have gone up to 47% and 55% respectively. So a lot more of our student body, more than half, are now dependent on some form of financial aid, and typically that form is loans. Now, I did a little bit of a calculation here, so I need to explain what I did. I said, one thing that I would always suggest doing is if you know that you've got this big expense coming up in 20 years, your kid was just been born, you want them to go to college, this big expense is coming, let's just put a little bit away each month, invest it, and then by the time they go to college, I'll have enough to pay for college. So the experiment is this. We know that depending upon your household income, you're going to pay a different amount for college. The College Board has done a beautiful job of laying this out. If you make a little bit of money, you'll get some financial aid. You won't have to pay as much for college. If you make a lot of money, you'll end up paying more. So that's what's reflected in these trend lines. As you go down, which is the higher income for the family, you're going to have an increasing cost for college. As you go from 2-year to a 2+2 4-year degree, to a public 4-year, to a private nonprofit, to a for-profit, the costs increase going this direction. All right, so that's where we are. So now when we do this calculation to figure out what percentage of the household income would have to be set aside each month in order to pay for college, and I've amortized it over 20 years, and I assume, I think it's fairly conservative, but an 8% return rate on that investment. What happens is that the cost now inverts. And we see that for the poorest families, a much higher percentage of their income must be set aside than for the richest families. And what's particularly striking in this table, I think, is that for the very least expensive 4-year degree, the amount of money they would have to put aside each month to pay for that degree is roughly equivalent to the amount that the richest households would have to put aside for a fairly expensive, elite, private, nonprofit education. So when we talk about why college is unaffordable, it's things like this that really bring home the fact that it's much less affordable now than it used to be. You can see that while the overall percentage of seniors that at one point or another have taken out a federal loan for their education is 64%, that number is much higher when we look at some of our minority groups. So how are we going to solve this financing puzzle? Well, one way is to allow access to higher education through these more affordable 2+2 programs. So that means more students probably going through community college. Another way would be to contain mission group, that is to say 2-year schools that are trying to be 4-year schools. As soon as they become a 4-year school, they become a lot more expensive because it costs money to support a 4-year degree. I think rankings have a lot to do with why colleges are paying more, and maybe this is actually a good thing for you because one of the things they do is they build really nice rec centers, and really Club Med sorts of dorms and things like that are a little bit more expensive for students to stay in rather than the monks' quarters that I remember being in the monastery. I don't know how that. Financial counseling, I think, is really necessary. A lot of the students that are coming, especially to UTSA, are first-generation students. The families have not been through college, and so providing some kind of counseling to help them understand what those costs are going to be and how to meet them. I think we need to look at new mechanisms of financing. We need to reduce some of our auxiliary costs, especially textbooks, I think, are right for this. I will mention that for those of you who are interested, the UT system, I was on a task force with them about reducing unmanageable student debt in 2012. There's a lot of really great recommendations in that report, and it's available on the UT system website, so something I can recommend to you. Now, this leads us to our fifth trend, and it's the solution that some people think is the answer to rising higher education costs. And that is the fact that our students are now digital natives. And they expect our colleges to use latest technology and software. This is one of our freshman issues. Really right in. I'm mindful of anytime Albert Einstein says something, it makes a lot of sense to me, though. So, what has been the impact of technology on college? There's many, many ways that it's had an impact. Here are some of them. I'm not going to read off the list to you. I will say that PowerPoint is one of those impacts. And in some ways, those impacts are a little annoying, aren't they? Main thing I would say is that this has basically provided us with different delivery mechanisms for education. But it has largely made things more convenient for our administration of universities. I mean, a lot of these really are about how easy is it to communicate, how easy is it to set up a database so that we understand what's going on at the university. And while these things are true, they facilitate convenience, they are almost never less expensive than the old way that we used to do things. So technology is not a way to save money, it's a way to have more flexibility, it's a way to have more convenience. Now this one, I hope speaks to many of you because I'm a real believer in how we need to change the classroom in the future. And I think this is one of the most exciting developments for technology in higher education today. What I'm showing you here is a mock-up of a smart classroom at MIT and one that actually exists at UTSA. And these are ones where we involve a group of students sitting around a table, all with a computer station. They work together, they interact, they flash their results up on these screens around the classroom. The instructor basically walks around them, helps guide them as they're working, but they're learning a lot by doing right there on the spot. I think this is a really powerful way for students to learn, and we're going to see a lot more of this. So if you haven't done it already at your campus, and I imagine many of you have, you will see demand for many more of these. Now, most of that demand is coming from our younger faculty, because our older faculty like to teach with a blackboard. But nevertheless, this is where things are headed, I believe. Some people have indicated that they think technology means that we no longer need a classroom. And indeed, the luster on classrooms seems to have faded a little bit. As I mentioned, though, technology is really a new delivery system. And I would question is, how different is it from other delivery systems that were supposed to take over for higher education in the past? So, for example, in the 1920s, we had the beginning of correspondence courses. In the 60s, it was television used for education. In the 90s, it was the internet. Now in the 2010s, we have tablets, and of course, you can also download course material on your smartphone. All of these have simply been a tool that we can use to deliver knowledge, but they're not the same as a college education. Now, where I think there is a place for these kinds of tools is in the following areas. One, we said we had an older student body. There are a lot of returning students. Many of them have jobs or they're placed down because they have families. These returning students, I think, working in competency-based education delivered online, I think is one of the modes that probably will see growth in the future. I believe those master's degrees, especially in the professional disciplines that are reaching out to working professionals, those are things that will see growth in the future. I think other credentials for professional enhancement, select applied doctorates, especially things in education, for example, and the use of technology for supplemental instruction. That is, when students are having difficulty in classes meeting face-to-face, the internet can be a great way to supplement what they're getting in class. I also think that, frankly, if you were a textbook publisher, you should be very, very worried about the power of the internet and the power of technology, because textbooks, I think, are probably going to be supposed to be online in the future. Now, many of you have heard of MOOCs, and I think in the 6 months since I created this slide, it's probably less relevant, or maybe it's still relevant. There was just an announcement last week that Arizona State had signed on with one of these providers, edX. MOOCs, I think, were very interesting developments. They offered large enrollments in tens and hundreds of thousands, free tuition. They use social networking to stimulate and to take place in classroom discussion. They use student peer graders within the class so that they could grade all of those papers for 100,000 students. And they attracted venture funding, which is a brand new thing for higher education. We're not used to having venture funding. However, I would say that there are some cautions that we learned from the MOOC lesson. One is that we still have very low course completion rates, in many cases under 10%. I think that there are very uncertain business models for this. I mean, it's one thing to give a course away for free, but eventually you've got to pay the person to put the course together. And the venture capital funding has paid for a lot of that, but I think at some point these venture capitalists are going to want a little bit of return on their investment. I believe it does dilute the professor-student relationship, and that's a problem. And I think it's going to be a poor fit for expanding our access, especially to our first-generation students and the ones that are particularly at risk in higher education. Now, I want to close by offering some thoughts about organizational evolution. In biological evolution, the species that adapt to changes in the environment are the ones that live the longest. So if we want to think conceptually about how that affects different institutions, how would we put that idea together for different organizations? Well, I point out that organized religion has been around for a pretty darn long time, and it seems to meet certain spiritual needs for people over time. Universities have been around not quite as long, but pretty long time as well. Governments typically last 500 years, at least we hope it lasts at least 500 years. Banks, large companies, a couple of hundred years. Small businesses, 50 to 100. High-tech companies, maybe a little less time. Some of them may last longer. I think the key here is that these different institutions interact with us spiritually in different ways. And I would close this group by pointing out that internet companies seem to have the fastest life. So I would pose the question, what if the greatest value of a traditional college education, that is one that's aimed at especially 18 to 24-year-olds, what if it is something else? What if it's the relationships that the student forms while they're in school, both with their fellow students and with their faculty, their mentors? What if it's the life skills that arise through creating good habits and refining them? I mean, habits are what turns into culture. Culture is what turns into character. But the greatest value in traditional college education is learning how to learn. Because after all, things are changing so fast these days that you really need to have facility with how to learn, because your job is going to change, your skill set is going to need to change long after you've left college. What if it's networking and leadership opportunities that you get through extracurricular activities in a campus environment? What if it's simply the opportunity to make mistakes in a relatively safe space, mistakes that you hopefully don't have to live with for the rest of your life? So what if the greatest value of a traditional college education is all of these things and not just what is delivered in a classroom? If that's the case, then the internet is not going to replace colleges. It's going to enhance colleges. But what you and I know of as a traditional college education is going to stay largely the same. It's going to have the same need for buildings and study spaces and libraries and offices and informal learning spaces and all the rest as we move forward. I'll leave you with a couple more quotes from Plutarch and a more recent one from Edward Malloy. But thank you very much for your attention tonight, and I also thank you for having drunk a lot of wine before coming here because it made you more receptive. On behalf happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
What programs have you found were the best fit for the active learning concept?
The ones that we use at our university right now are predominantly in engineering, but I will tell you that our biology department is also very interested in that. I think there have been some smaller outposts in the social sciences that have used it a little bit. I will say that one of the things that we've tried to emphasize is more hybrid education, where students would get some material, via online delivery and then come to the class to discuss. But we haven't yet figured out how to get all of the students to actually prepare for the the face-to-face part of that interaction. So sometimes it doesn't work as well as we want.
So 2020, what does your crystal ball say? Will UTSA rate rank?
I don't think we'll be top. I hope we'll be up to 50%.
What is your advice for chief facility officers to engage in this dialogue for new pedagogy facilities with the academy?
Well, I think first of all, have a great relationship with your provost. Good start. I will tell you that there is no university that I'm aware of where one's decisions at the top can be implemented down to the very bottom in a seamless way. It requires a lot of work and a lot of conversation. But I think it is a collaborative endeavor, and I think there does need to be a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration between the facilities group and the academic affairs shop, in order to make sure that the environments that we're creating, and not just the classroom environments, but also the informal learning spaces, the access to technology, wherever it may be, and the access to things that make a living environment for students on campus more comfortable, are all very important to student learning and student completion degrees. And so there's not enough, there you probably need to get student affairs involved as well. So it really has to be a complete college, a complete university dialogue about how we create an environment the students want to be in. If they want to be there, chances are they're going to finish.
I want to thank you for a very enlightening talk and for bucking the trend. I think there are many people who want to start planning for the future of service of higher education, and I think many of us in this room take back a lot of hope from your talk. All the challenges that you've pointed out are familiar. The press has made a big deal of what the challenges are. But when there are challenges, there are also opportunities. So on the flip side of the coin, what are you seeing that give you hope? And if you did some things, you may be better off.
Well, I think we are finally waking up to the fact that we can't just provide the luxury model everywhere we go, that we do have to be mindful of the cost of the things that we do. I'm sure you've already seen it in the way we put our facilities together. I mean, I would love to be able to always produce the most extravagantly designed and beautiful facility for a new classroom function. But the fact of the matter is that given our budgets and given our realities, a sufficient building is often enough. And where I think we need to be mindful is in how we use our spaces flexibly so that we can use a given space for more than one purpose. Because we find that the usage of a space during the day can change, or I should say that the demand for space usage during the day changes. So if we can somehow tailor our spaces so that they match that change in demands, then I think we'll be moving in the right direction. I do think that we're going to see a lot more of students that are shopping for inexpensive ways to go through school. And one of the things that we've had to wake up to is the reality that we need to be more mindful of the students that transfer in after a couple of years in a community college and making sure that they're not paying a penalty and having to take extra courses to finish their degree just because they happen to start at community college. So these are some things that I see as opportunities where we can do better.
Time for one final question. Okay, so question. Yeah,
you said that 65% of people in Korea go to tertiary school. So were you able to find out how do they teach it? You know, do they do more virtual and online teaching, or is it a more direct or conservative approach?
Well, it's interesting you asked the question about Korea. There's a couple things I can say. One is that their K-12 environment is one of the best in the world. But it's one of the best in the world because it is a high-pressure environment. Students, if they want to get a good job, they have to go to college. If they want to go to college, they have to score well on the exam at the end of high school. If they want to score well on the exam, they have to study like mad in order to get that. It turns out that those students in K-12 there's a wonderful book, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the title of the book, but it's about comparing the educational systems in different countries. And in Korea, a lot of the students are not learning in school per se. They spend their 7 hours in school, but then they go spend another 7 hours in a study group after school to prepare for college. Now, the second thing that I can say about Korea is that I know that they are trying to expand their higher education, trying to build more universities. But guess where they're drawing their model? The United States. They want to build more American kinds of universities. It's not internet. It's more traditional colleges. It's more of the traditional stuff. And I wasn't part of the conversation, but I had a friend who told me that one of these guys was asked after touring around all this wonderful thing, well, what about the internet and technology and all of these things that are changing how we do things in America? And they kind of changed the subject and moved on to the next building. So I think that in the case of Korea, it's just the economic necessity of having a college degree that really drives the higher attainment rate. And here, I think the other thing that affects us here is that we really do have a very diverse population, much more diverse than I think any of the countries that are ahead of us on the whole, and also a bigger immigrant population than any of the other countries that are ahead of us in that survey. So I think we do a pretty good job with the people we have, but we can do even better.
So, and the other question is, do you have an opinion on whether online education is better for undergraduate students or for graduate students?
Oh, I definitely have an opinion. I think it's much better.
Share it with us.
I think it's much better for graduate students. I think that what online education requires is someone who is motivated and self-disciplined. And most 18, well, I'll just say, I have a 17-year-old who's about to go to college. And I can't imagine that he would finish a college degree if it were all online. But people who are going for a graduate degree, they've already finished an undergraduate degree. Many of them are working or they have families. And they have a real goal in mind that they want from their education. I think there are a lot of kids that go to college now that don't have a goal in mind necessarily, and so that's why they would have difficulty finishing. But graduate students, I think that's the sweet spot for internet education.
Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you so much for such a wonderful and enlightening presentation.